Well, good morning, everybody. First of all, just a quick announcement. I did finally order a new microphone. I apologize. I should have done this a while ago. I thought I could fix this current one and get it to work a little bit better, but I do know that it picks up some very odd noises, and you can hear them on some platforms and not others. I know in my car, if I ever do a quick verification listen, I hear weird, like a bass track. Some of you even commented about that yesterday. So I didn't put that in there intentionally. I think this mic just is not fitting my purposes, and so I got a new one ordered. I apologize. It won't be here till next Friday. But when it gets in, we'll be sure to swap it out. The other thing we got to get into today is this pattern. And pattern's been quite unique this summer in that we've watched the big Pacific high split into kind of two pieces like this. While the Bermuda high at times has been quite strong, it's what's helped guide, like, for example, Debbie to come into this particular part of the East Coast. And it's really affected the temperature and precipitation pattern by allowing a lot of cooler air to dive into the central United States. I'm going to call this pattern into question in a big way because of a couple of big things that are all happening in the tropics, mainly with a couple of typhoons we need to get into in a few moments. But overall, what we've done is we've really driven quite a bit of cooler air into the midsection of the United States, and really the only places that have stayed hot have been throughout the Intermountain West Great Basin, up into the Columbia Basin at times early in this month, and then down here in New Mexico and Texas along the Gulf Coast and into Florida where the temperatures have been extremely hot. But in the central U.S., we almost grabbed a frost last week here in parts of North Dakota, and we saw the temperatures really just plunge in the midsection of the United States, while the precip pattern to start this month looks something like this. So I know it's a bit of a busy map, but this is where we've had rainfall so far this month. And I really look at this to find those areas that have not. We've talked a lot about Debbie. We've talked a lot about the storms that rolled through Kansas and Oklahoma lately, even those that clipped the panhandle. We've talked about this earlier in the month, but just take a look at these things. There are pockets that have still been missed, and here's a big one right in through here, and it does extend back into parts of central Texas. You can also find some here in like southern Saskatchewan, for example, or parts of Wyoming. And the pockets that are missed, we just have to see if the pattern's about to break and get some moisture in there. Because all day yesterday I was at this meeting in St. Louis. I was watching those storms that came across Kansas and just trying to see if they could get into the Mid-South to start to bring in some of that relief. But it seemed to be just a nearly impossible task to get those storms to break through that barrier. So we're going to really just step back and assess if we have what it would take to really shift things around and change that precip pattern and also this temperature pattern. So let's kind of dig into this. This morning, as the sun was rising here across the United States, we can see some wildfire smoke across the Northeast. This is Ernesto. We'll talk more about Ernesto in a few moments. We have a pretty decently sized cluster of storms that's rolling through the midsection of the United States. We're going to take a look at that in a few moments, but I want to take you back to yesterday. Again, large storms coming off of the front range, very hot and dry to the south, big storms in parts of the west, and you can still see more of these wildfires that are in Northern California and Oregon, just putting out quite a bit of smoke here. But if we take a look at this morning's radar, let's blow this up a little bit. This will go all the way up till about the time I'm recording here. And we just watching these storms that went through last night right along I-80 and north of it and south of it. I mean, there was rain along the interstate across Nebraska. I was talking with a colleague of mine, Eric Hunt, that works out here, and he was hopeful for these rains. I was pretty impressed. Eric picked up on this. Gosh, when were we together? It's a couple of weeks ago at a conference, and he's like, I really think we're going to be getting some mid-August rains. And well done, Eric. You picked up on that pattern quite well. But you can see here that this is still continuing to move into Illinois into Iowa and Missouri. And I'm just thinking about how this is going to progress into Illinois and maybe get into the Ohio River Valley or get into the this part of the Mid-South down toward the Delta. This is an area that really needs to pick up some more moisture. The storms this morning were pretty active too. As they're here in parts of Iowa and Missouri, you can see quite a bit of lightning. Some of the isolated storms farther to the north still putting out quite a bit of lightning early today. And so we just have questions as to how they're going to progress. So if we take a look at the Storm Prediction Center's outlook, they've kept this pretty consistent for today. So this is the area we're watching, and those storms are moving in that area right now. But they have enlarged the slight risk region for tomorrow on the 15th. Most of Illinois and Missouri and kind of the surrounding area here under the risk of some stronger storms tomorrow. As we get into day 3, I'm quite hopeful in the models that we're going to be spreading more of this rain over parts of the eastern Corn Belt and parts of Tennessee and Kentucky, getting over to West Virginia, Pennsylvania. There's still a large dry pocket in this area that we've got to get some moisture in place, and you can see that when I show you the latest soil moisture data. Just to take note of this part here of the lower and mid-Mississippi River Valley and then the Ohio Valley, which needs quite a bit of rain. And I'm looking forward to next week. I'm going to make a couple of trips to Indiana for a couple of field days. I'd like to see how these fields look in parts of India. I'll be in the north central, I'll be in the south central next week, and it'd be great just to kind of check in on this region. It is important to note that where that rain moved over this morning, the NASA's modeling of the soil moisture, it was low at 16 inches, and so this is some critical rains coming through this area. But as you can see, some of those holes I drew, that's where we really have these very low soil moisture amounts that need to get filled in here in the central United States. And if you take a look at parts of the Northwest as well, that's taken on that heat, still very dry in these areas. So the model was well initialized this morning. I like it. It's pretty consistent. So let's just watch this throughout the day today. This is mid-afternoon into evening. We're going to see more of that rain push up as the low curls up here, from the Red River Valley of the north to the upper Mississippi Valley. Isolated stronger storms still back in the western plains and also here. And then as we play into the overnight hours, Iowa, we're going to watch carefully to see how the storms evolve overnight into the early morning. At this point, should these storms make it into the overnight, they will be riding on top of the boundary layer. So this is a form of kind of elevated convection. And sometimes that can take on the shape of a real nice arcing line of storms. And we need to see where that is, if that is. Certainly the Storm Prediction Center is on the lookout for it. But that'll push through parts of Missouri, Illinois, Wisconsin, into Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio. It's kind of poor timing, middle of the day, to see it come through here. It might not be able to make the transition from that nocturnal type storm system to the day type storm system. But we'll be watching that as it goes through Indiana and Ohio and Michigan. And then watch again late that night. This will be late on Thursday night. We'll have to watch for the risk of severe storms farther to the south here, coming through parts of Missouri, southern Illinois, into Kentucky, and maybe into Tennessee. But there are multiple chances for getting rain into these drier areas. And I will be very keen to see what the rainfall totals look like as this passes through here. Now, again, that's not to miss out on other things like the low that's curling up part of the bigger trough that's in the northwest. You can see right here. Look at that low just spinning its way through parts of Oregon into Idaho and Montana, delivering some storms. But on the corner edge of this, we can actually see where Ernesto is as well. And just to give you a quick update on Ernesto, the National Hurricane Center, we're very close to the threshold for a hurricane to be 74 miles an hour, and we expect it to be there later today. And in their forecast, they have by Friday this to be up to a major hurricane, so Cat 3 or stronger, as it moves north. And again, the situation here is where the Bermuda High is, where the troughs of low pressure are, and it's just kind of skirting in between. That's kind of just a very generic and simple way to say this is going to stay out to open ocean and might hit Bermuda, squarely. In fact, the eye might sit on top of Bermuda. Some of the forecast data from the super blend here, from the European model, the GFS, the UK Met, and the CMC, no longer even has any outlying members that are getting close to the East Coast. So some better evidence that this is really going to stay out in open ocean, just given, again, the position of the high-pressure cell called the Bermuda High out here. I think that's the main steering current with this. Now, there's all sorts of little nuances that we could dig into, but given that it stays out there, I got to turn my attention somewhere else. And that somewhere else is over here. So where you are in the world, this is Japan, and this, of course, is China, Mongolia. You're seeing ocean temperature anomalies in the background. So this is where we've got very, very warm oceans. So we've looked at that a lot of times, this warm blob that's off the coast of Japan. And there are two systems here that I'm very interested in looking at, because where we started with this pressure pattern we've been in and the predictions by the European model, which we've gone over many times, to wipe this out and put a big area of high pressure here. When you look at these systems that are out in the Pacific, the question is, are they going to be disruptive to that and possibly give us a lot of forecast error as we go forward? And what I mean is this. The first one, this would be the one farther to the north here. The current forecast pattern is for this to move to the north, the remnants of it, and get near the Aleutian Islands. So it's going to be very difficult in the next 10 days to produce high pressure in this area, which is what some of the models are suggesting, if the remnants of a hurricane are somewhere nearby. And then the typhoon, actually. The second one here, look at its forecast, very near Japan. And then where's it going? Straight to the same spot. I mean, if you can just imagine the map continuing, the Aleutian Islands of Japan, or of Alaska are over here. And I ask all these questions because we see the models attempting to build a robust ridge in the middle part of the country. And if these tropical systems, like for example the one here, influence the North Pacific jet, it will get a different story. So I think this is a time period where over the next 4 or 5 days, we got to watch where this goes. So here we are, just all the way by Friday. And we've been talking about this, right? This northern hemisphere view is a little different from what I've been showing you, but the pattern's been doing this with Ernesto here. And so this is the trough sweeping through later this week, the one that's bringing all the unsettled weather. We see the trough in the northwest, keeping things cool. The heat is suppressed to the south underneath the larger ridge. Now keep an eye on this, all right? Because as we go from Friday into Saturday and Sunday, wow, look, okay, there it is. So this moved here. But look at this highly amplified pattern. And there's Ernesto. That trough is what's keeping Ernesto away from the U.S. And then here is the broader, Bermuda high or North Atlantic high that's not pushing it east. This is the ridge we're going to watch start to expand in the plains, bringing in some heat as we get into early next week, opening up more into the northern plains of the United States. Now, what we were watching all along, there it is. There's the little wiggle. See it right there? That's one that next Tuesday we're keeping an eye on for initiating storms in the northern plains that'll eventually move into the Midwest. Those are ridge riding troughs. That's what we call those. But what happened to the tropical system? See it right here? It gets pulled into this broader trough that's going toward the Aleutian Islands into the Bering Sea. And as we get out there farther, it becomes a part of this. But there's a secondary trough here, and this ridge is, that's a really highly, I say amplified, more meridional bit of flow. And I want to know how much into this mid to late August time frame is that going to influence this almost high over low look in the Pacific to reinforce where this ridge is going to be. And I don't think we have much knowledge of that just yet, because sometimes you drop a deep trough in here, and depending on the pressure pattern across the rest of the northern hemisphere, this can just plunge into this area, or it can get completely absorbed over to Greenland. And I'm not sure the models are handling that really well. Some of them by the 24th, 25th, what did it do? This is part of the remnants of that system, and here's the other part of it. And so that shoved the ridge back farther to the west, meaning we're going to be getting more cooler air into this region, kind of anywhere to the east of that line. And I really think that's where this pattern is possibly getting set up according to the artificial intelligence. And let's just go have a look at the European ensemble. Now I'm going to have to go back to the 0Z run and get you way out there. But do you see how we've washed out that feature in the 0Z run from the European? It still has something here, and there's a trough in this area, but it pushed the ridge all the way back to Arizona and New Mexico. So there's similarities, but it's not as well defined when you look at the images as the AIFS, because this is 51 different runs all stitched together, and you're given the composite. All right, all of that is to say that it's likely going to affect this, not now, but probably 8, 9, 10 days from now. So this is the next 7 days according to the WPC, and we've largely not seen a major change to this story, except the WPC is now picking up as that ridge comes through. Remember, the little flow comes around, there's a little bump in it. That's the storms next week that we're keeping an eye on in the northern plains from the pattern setup. So very hot and dry south. It's going to be isolated storms here as the Bermuda high is way off to the east. And but we are expecting wet conditions, a lot of which are coming through right now over the next couple of days into Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, parts of Kentucky, Indiana. And I think the heaviest rains will likely either be somewhere in Missouri or in southern Illinois. There seems to be some pretty consistent forecasting there. It's also in the NBM, the National Blend of Models. The NBM day 7 to day 10, that's the difference, 7 to 10. And I'm going to do the same thing for the AI. So this is the artificial intelligence. It was the first to kind of give us a good clue about this. And this is the 10-day AI. So look at that upper Midwest rainfall pattern. Very, very wet in that area while we're staying very dry down in Texas and pockets of the southeast and then up the Front Range. The models have kind of picked up on a drier pattern here. Let's add to this the European model, 7 days. So there it is. And then here's the European model, 10-day. And I see a lot of similarities. This is consistent. And then we've got the GFS 7 and the GFS 10. So let's flip this over and look at some probabilities. Unlike yesterday, where the European ensemble had, I think I can go back and look at it. I can give you the 12Z from yesterday. It had much more, with the 0Z had much more widespread rain in this area, but the new 0Z run, it's got it much more focused in these particular areas. I like seeing the chances of getting wetter conditions into this part of the eastern Corn Belt, but it's going to come in the next couple of days with the storm system that's rolling through. And just as we've been discussing, my biggest threat area for the risk of flash drought and very hot conditions is going to remain down here in the southern plains, which is an area that has been under the gun for a while for the risk of this heat. But just take a look at a couple of the other areas across the country who could possibly be drier. For example, this part of the Columbia Basin, pockets of Wyoming and Montana. It's all just kind of the nuances in this pattern and the flow that's coming through. But I still have a big question mark for anything after this time period as to what the patterns are going to look like. So when we look at week 2, even though the model's been consistent with this, I now have much lower confidence. And the main reason for that is this pair of typhoons that's out in the Pacific. I don't think the models are going to be able to handle how they interact with the jet stream flow once they move toward the Aleutian Islands or Bering Sea. So we'll pay attention to this carefully together to see if the forecast modifies with time, given that those typhoons are going to be disruptive. So I'll show it to you, but I just think we need to be cautious that this could likely change. And I think the only place that might be consistent in this forecast is going to be down here into Texas with the drier risk. All right. So from here, let's talk about the temperatures, because today we have this expanding area of excessive heat watches, advisories. On the northern side of it, we have a flood watch out for a big section of Missouri. Also, we're watching for flood here in parts of North Dakota as well. Air quality issues out west with a red flag warning in parts of Oregon. The high temperatures today look something like this. So large contrast from where the cloud cover is and the rain is versus what we have down in the south, where temperatures are way into the 90s, low 100s. That's Thursday. Getting into Friday and Saturday, you see the same setup. So as that storm complex rolls through, we get some cooler air behind it as well. After the rain comes through this area, again, locally very heavy into a couple of pockets here. Very hot, 103 in Amarillo for Saturday. Getting into Sunday, still hot on Monday, another day of 103 here. And next Tuesday, the oppressive heat just stays down in the south. But this is, again, where we begin to lose maybe some of that confidence. Day 5 through 10 has been consistent in the model. What I'm curious about is day 10 through 15. And I'll be honest, what I'm most curious about is this. So I did expect it to be hot farther to the south. But let's just imagine that we do break a piece of that system that comes through here, reinforces this trough, which drives cooler air into this area. That means it will press this hotter air that's expected to be in the Central Plains back farther and farther to the west. And the European model is a bit more keen on it. For example, that's the day 5 through 10, and this is the day 10 through 15. So notice where it's anchoring the hottest conditions is farther to the south and west. So there is certainly some model disagreement about all of this. As we start to stretch this out, I want to talk a bit more about the tropical season, because I told you that we are going to watch Ernesto, and after that a bit of a lull, but we had some pretty strong evidence given the position of the MJO moving out of phase 1 and 2, which is where it is here. So see, I'm lining this up vertically, 1 and 2, moving over toward phase 3, 4, 5, that historically following that progression, which is somewhere around the 23rd, 25th, 26th, something like that, we start to see increased activity in the Atlantic. It was kind of interesting. I don't often look at this, but I should look at it more. The CPC puts out its own global tropical hazard outlook. And what we notice here is that in their week 3, which would follow that progression, right, of getting out there to the end of the month with the MJO, they've now really increased the probability of some development in this area. Now, all of this will depend on in terms of its threat to the United States or to the Caribbean is going to be where the Bermuda high is. And I think that's going to be tricky because the models keep doing this, that outlook from now to mid-September. They want to put in high pressure here, higher than normal. And if you don't remember, at the beginning, it's been split for a while. And I just told you that we're going to send a tropical system here to reinforce this trough. And are we really going to be building in much higher pressure in its wake in this area? Because if that's the case, you zip in here to the United States and look at the precip pattern over that 30 days, and it's gone over very dry in the midsection of the United States and wet in the Northeast. And I look at it and I'm like, all right, I can't make complete sense of this pattern unless that high pressure builds north of Hawaii. So I just want to let you know that the sub-seasonal forecasts are not set. And if you compare models, I mean, it's really not set in the pattern. So we just need to see if persistence ends up winning this, and the disruptions from the tropical systems reinforce the pattern we've had, again, which is this. That's why we started here today. Okay, so let's start to wrap this one up and go to South America. Southern hemisphere, we're looking at a different setup entirely. This is about the strength of the wind screaming across, with the very negative southern oscillation, the very negative Antarctic oscillation, or southern annular mode. And the new trends in the models, this is interesting, have gone closer to average here, suggesting that maybe late in September we start to actually get more monsoonal flow coming in to this area rather than the very dry conditions we have right now. We're going to have to wait on that, but it is important to note that southern Mato Grosso, then Mato Grosso do Sul, parts of Goiás, getting over towards Sao Paulo, Paraná, very, very dry in the forecast, which means they'll be waiting until October to get some of that normal October rainfall to get going. And remember, yesterday we did a report on that at the very end, saying that the October rainfall over the last, 50 years in the trend analysis has been drier. So here's the big thing up on top of all of this. So if you want to see all these things upsetting the pattern as we move out of summer, it's going to be La Niña. And the European model just came up with a forecast that is going to try to extend this weaker easterly wind burst in this area and let it keep going for a while. So you're going, what is that? Well, this is monitoring the trade winds, and it's looking at zonal flow. So zonal means west to east. So when we have negative numbers, this tends to mean that we've got more of an easterly component to the flow. So when you look at this, those trade winds could be stronger than normal in this direction. And that's what we call La Niña. So what I'll be very keen to see is if this is sustained, or if it's just an easterly wind burst. And if it is sustained, how do the ocean temperatures respond? Because I've made a case that this and this and this are the most dominant things controlling the pattern, where the pressure is, how the flow goes around it. But if we get a little bit more of a signal from La Niña, this will really begin to change things up quite a bit. We've looked at that repeatedly over the last several weeks, and we'll continue to do that. But for today on Wednesday, I'm going to wrap it up here and just let you know the things I'm watching, and we'll just chat again in the morning. Have a good one. Thanks.